Just related to the challenges or suggestions, recommendations you have in terms of how government does think about being performance-oriented in its either support of other organizations or measuring its own work. There is a sense that government is, there are performance-based contracts and that there's enormous burdens of reporting that organizations have to do because government is trying to reflect the value of accountability. So do you just want to comment on sort of how you think that system is working now and how you'd like to see it going forward?
I just had something on that. That is probably one of the hardest areas because accountability is in areas you don't expect. Just deciding what age people should be fingerprinted for working with vulnerable populations was very difficult. When you look at the whole after-school market in New York, no one fingerprinted anyone under 18. They just didn't have to. And if you fingerprint someone, it costs you about $150. I mean, it's not a cheap cost. And so the idea was that we should be concerned about those who are 14 and above, that we should do background checks on them. This was a decision, and when we first had to push for this, because we had some cases that were not good cases, we'll just leave it at that. We decided to raise the age to 16 because 16 was considered the age of an adult in the legal system. Right? We had our own internal politics, not 14. We're trying to move it wherever we could. And the biggest resistance was from community organizations. They were the ones who were totally against it. And they were like, if this is a local organization and I'm working with someone who was previously, incarcerated, and this is their chance and opportunity, and I'm mentoring them, then why are you hurting me? You're hurting my mission of my organization. I cannot tell you how many people wrote me letters in English and Spanish. My commissioner was not visible in some of these press briefings. But we had to find a way that in order to accept more federal dollars as match, that we had security measures for anyone that was in close contact with young people, including even fingerprinting volunteers. Now, this may be normal in other communities. In New York City, this was not happening. This was not happening. So it was a radical.
That's a reminder to us that there's a lot. Whenever government is involved, there's regulations that come because everyone's. Go to the performance.
Yeah, I'll go into performance real quick. But I bring that up because when we're talking about accountability and performance, we're always thinking about what's the outcome? What has someone done in this? And accountability and performance is also around protections.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think we don't talk about that piece. And that piece to me is just as important. And when you're talking with organizations that aren't used to that, we're getting to outcomes. I'm just trying to get them to understand why fingerprinting is an important thing with vulnerable populations. Right. So as far as outcomes, especially in the workforce area, it's kind of the way that we look at, and I'm going to say it, community colleges. The way we use TAP and Pell. You get your money to get in. You're not paid to keep them or let them to go out. And if we did, we would see a graduation rate that we would all be proud of. And so that is the way workforce has worked. And as a result, now we're looking at workforce that has some outcome measures. Europe is able to meet those measures for the most part. Many of the other nonprofit organizations are not, and we have to learn how to play in the sandbox with everyone to get a statewide agenda for more workforce money. But as a result, we find ourselves having to dilute the language of outcomes in order to have a coalition.
Yeah.
And there isn't enough coalition support on it. It just isn't. And I'm sure America had to deal with some of this as well. It doesn't mean that we haven't pushed the agenda on outcomes, but it's not to the extreme that I would personally like to see.
Yeah.
So this reveals my age. When I started working in the nonprofit business, there was no such thing as a performance-based contract.
Yeah, right.
And we were really bummed out when the performance-based contract came into business because you didn't get to keep what you didn't produce. In the old contracts, they were just line items. You did that, and you got big chunks of change, and that helped us manage flow in many ways. So I say that, but one of the things that I think has happened in the era of performance-based and outcome push from government, which I'm all about, except government doesn't actually pay you adequately per outcome. And so what has happened is that, a government dollar is worth 80 cents, and now it's worth 60 cents, and now it's worth 40 cents of what it really costs you to do what you're doing. And so there is a gap between the money you get in these performance-based contracts and what it costs to produce these outcomes.
Yeah.
And I think that's really squeezed not-for-profits. I'm sure you live that every day, on the other side at DYCD, because people were screaming at you.
All the time.
We can't afford to do it for what you're asking us to do it, and the pressures of that are profound.
I think all those are right, and I would add one more thing, which is that nonprofits, except for maybe the very smallest and youngest ones, all have all kinds of reporting that they already have to do. They have to report to their philanthropic funders. They have to report to remain eligible to deliver services independent of their revenue sources. And there is such a burden on reporting that often is not very strategic or very useful. It often doesn't really tell you what you would want to know. Besides compliance and protections, is this organization, what is it doing? Is it creating results? How is it doing it? The things that you'd actually want to know are not generally captured, or they're captured in such incoherent ways that nonprofits can't even really always understand their own impact drivers and their own economic models. So hand in hand with the kinds of things we're interested in seeing happen through America Forward, we want to continue pushing on the field and thinking about ways that we can get clearer about what we really do need to report on, how to think about it more effectively, and try to get that lifted up into the way expectations are set for reporting. I think we've seen incremental progress in philanthropy on that. Different funders behave differently, but overall I think there's been some progress and lots of room for improvement.